Hello, my name is Susanne Evans and welcome to the Change Stories podcast. This is a podcast for people who are interested in creating change, whether that is within organisations or for individuals. In each podcast episode, I will have a conversation with someone about their work to share their story. Each story and conversation will provide you with ideas and inspiration for your own organisation or for you personally. To find out more about each episode, including further reading, and to share your change stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk.
Hello and welcome to the Change Stories podcast. I'm here today with Jess Annison. Hi Jess, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me, Susanne. Really lovely.
Let me tell everyone a bit about you. So Jess Annison, OBE MSc, is a positive psychology practitioner, accredited coach, facilitator and author. Having navigated her own mid-career crisis, Jess helps individuals and teams to create their most meaningful work life. Her evidence-based approach is underpinned by the science of positive psychology, in which she has published scientific research. Her book, Smart Careers, How to Turn a Mid-Career Crisis into a Rewarding Work Life, was published by Bloomsbury in August 2025. I'm really looking forward to speaking to you. I have so many questions, and so much of your book resonated both with me and with people I've been speaking to recently. So for the viewers, I'm waving Jess's book. There it is. Congratulations on the publishing. It was relatively recent. How's it all going?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so it was 6 weeks ago. And I think it's going well. Publishing is quite an unusual sector. I think, the rest of us have data coming out of our ears, analytics for LinkedIn posts at our fingertips. Publishing sector seems to be like, yeah, we'll get a statement in a few months' time and we'll let you know how it's going. So it seems to be going down well. I've had some really lovely feedback. People that have said, oh, I've bought a copy and actually I've bought another one and given it to a friend. And that for me is perfect. And if that's all that happens from it, then I would be so made up with that. So great to see it out there.
It's a great book, and I know exactly what you mean about publishing, because every time I see someone that I haven't seen for a while, they say to me, well, how's your book doing? And I always say, I have no idea. I don't know. I think people are still buying it.
Yes.
So what was it that inspired you to write it? Did you reach a point in your own work where you thought, actually, I keep being asked the same questions and I want to put something out there, or was it something different?
Yeah, it's a bit of a culmination of things. Definitely that. I have also, I think, written the book that I needed a few years ago. So I basically went through a bit of a period where, having worked 15, 20 years in jobs that I really loved and at times, felt very, very passionate about, got to a point where I was a bit like, oh, goodness, I'm quite tired. I was pretty much on the edge of burnout. And that sense of fulfillment and meaningfulness that had been driving me for so long was starting to ebb away. And I was also sort of looking ahead, I was 40-ish and I was thinking, oh, goodness, you've got 20 years, maybe 25 years, maybe even 30 years, who knows, of work. And I want to get back to that place where actually it is something that's really fulfilling and satisfying and rewarding. So I was having this personal thing, which was the instigator that took me from a career in organisational change and project management to now coaching and facilitation. And then I was working with people and that conversation, just kept on coming up. I think I'm doing the right thing, but is this it? Could I be doing something a bit better? Is there something that, the shine's worn off? How might I get that back? And so I kind of wanted to put it all together. In parallel, I'd done a master's and I'd decided to do my master's research project into meaningful work, partly because it had been such a big driver for me. And so that got me into the academic literature. And I thought, oh my goodness, there's some great stuff in here. Meaningful work is so important for our physical well-being, our mental health and emotional well-being. It's good for our relationships. It makes us happier outside of work. It makes us better role models for children and friends and family. But all of that stuff was kind of buried in the 30-page paper under a load of scientific kind of jargon. So as I was starting to think about kind of how do I bring this into my work, it felt to me like what was missing was the translation of this into a book that's actually really accessible. Anyone, I wanted to be able to pick it up and go, oh yeah, there's something here, something that resonates. I can see myself enough here. So it was, as I say, a culmination of me my clients and wanting to bring my master's sort of studies to a more sort of wider audience.
And I think you've definitely achieved that. What I love about the book is that it's full of stories, and stories of people who are going through that thought process themselves. And I mean, of course, I love a story, and that really brings it to life. And I think when I was reading it, and then I've been having conversations recently with a variety of people, friends and colleagues, and for a lot of people in that kind of midlife, mid-career space, what I'm hearing is that they're not feeling fulfilled by their job, they're bored, but then they've also got this struggle of it pays well, it's flexible, so I can work around my family, I don't have to work long hours, but there's just something missing. Is that something that you hear a lot in your work as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly that. Sometimes it comes over as this kind of question, is this it? It's quite a big, meaty existential question. We spend so much of our time at work. So to not be really happy, really fulfilled in, what accounts for such amount of our kind of waking hours, feels quite challenging. But yeah, absolutely. Clients saying, is this it? I'd quite like to do something different. I've always dreamed of being an ex, but that feels like, too much of a leap. And the midlife period, I think, is particularly interesting. Dr. Lucy Ryan calls it the midlife collision, because actually you've got, maybe you've got children you're caring for, maybe you've got kind of elderly parents, and so you've got caring responsibilities in a different way, potentially. You've probably got a fairly chunky mortgage at this point. There's quite a lot of things that are keeping us in this way of working that we've become accustomed to. So the risk of changing some of that feels really quite great. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't really want to write a career change book. So this book isn't really about career change. It's about wherever you find yourself, how can you craft more meaningfulness? That might be in your current role, your current organization. There's lots that you can do without making any kind of change. For other people, it might be a little bit more significant. It might involve something, akin to a sort of a more significant career change. But there's a whole lot of stuff that we can do before that. And hopefully that helps with some of that stuckness that we can feel when we think, oh goodness, I can't give it up because actually, yeah, it pays well. The flexibility is good. I've got a good boss. There's a good level of understanding. I don't want to give that up. So yeah, I wanted to create something that actually you can pick up at any particular stage within that, and just really help people experiment as well. So again, this is all about small shifts that can be made, either practical shifts, but also cognitive shifts as well, different ways of thinking about your work, the different stories that you tell yourself. We all tell ourselves stories, and we tell other people stories about what we do and how we do it and why it matters. And I think over time, those stories can get a little bit duller. We don't necessarily sort of have as much richness, and just by reconnecting with why you took this role in the first place, what attracted you to that particular company or the product or the service that you're doing, again, just can help us notice more meaningfulness and get some of the brilliant benefits of meaningful work without making any kind of real change at all.
And I think that's one of the things I really liked about the approach, because so often when you read a book or you read an article or you'll talk to people about, wanting to make a change in your work, it seems to be there's like you don't do any, there's two options: you do nothing or you change everything, and that is really scary for people and not always possible for the reasons that you've already talked about. So I like this idea of the career crafting, and I'll come back to that because I want to dig into that in a bit more detail. But I wanted to ask you about meaningfulness at work. So for you and for the research that you've done and the literature you've read, what does that actually mean?
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's a great
question.
Massive
question.
It's a great question. But on one level, it feels really simple, but actually there's so many layers and quite a lot of nuance underneath. There's various different ways of conceptualizing it. Different academics have different approach. What often it boils down to is some combination of the contribution that you're making, so how you see your work in terms of the impact that it makes, So contribution is there. Something about connection and belonging. So the relationships that you have maybe with co-workers, potentially with customers or end users, how you feel kind of connected to the end result of what you do. Something about autonomy and the ability that you have to determine what you do, how you do it. And then the last two are growth and strengths use. So the extent to which you're able to really play to and leverage your strengths, not just the things that you're good at because you've learned to be good at, but those real natural talents where we get a lot of energy from, and growth, how you're able to push out of your comfort zone. So contribution, connections, autonomy, strengths, and growth. And the exact mix will vary for all of us. Some of us will put much more emphasis on a couple of areas and less so on the others. That's fine. And one of the things I really encourage people to do as a very first step is just to sit with that for a little bit and think about what meaningfulness means for them. It's entirely subjective. Somebody might get so much of their meaning from their connections with colleagues, and actually it's all about the chats that you have on Teams or while you're making a coffee, going for lunch every week with a particular colleague, seeing customers having their complaints resolved in a timely way. That could be where they draw all of their meaning from, and they don't need the other bits. So getting a sense of that is a really, really good first step, because once you've got that, you can then work out, okay, where is my current work fulfilling this? Where perhaps is it falling short a little bit, and how might I then dial it up or do something differently or think about it in a different way? So yeah, it's quite can be quite a it can feel a little bit sort of vague, a little bit nuanced. One of the things I say quite a lot within the book is, do the practical exercises. The book is full of practical exercises, but even better, talk about it with somebody. Do that exercise and then share it with somebody, a friend, your partner, somebody that you trust at work, because actually it can help to verbalize and put some meat on the bones of some of this stuff. Working with a coach is fantastic. It's not necessarily available for everybody. But yeah, working it through with somebody really helps then work out kind of what you might want to do next.
And I suspect for most of us, that is not a conscious thought process that we will have been through before. So, for many of us, me included, you sort of fall into a job and then work through it, and you don't necessarily think consciously about what does this bring to my life until you start to have that feeling of something's missing. So I think that you're absolutely right. That's the first point, is to think about what's missing and then think about how you can find it. And I guess that could be in work, but it could also be outside of work. There could be a hobby or some volunteering or something like that would give people that missing piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think seeing meaning at work as part of a round, wider, meaningful life is really, really important. Some of us, myself absolutely included, we can associate work so much with our identity. It takes up such a big part of our lives. It's how we introduce ourselves. We forget that we're also so many other things as well. And so one of the things I say within the book quite a lot is keep it in perspective. Actually, having meaningful work is great, lots and lots of benefits. I think it's something that everybody deserves, but you deserve it as part of a meaningful life. And so spending some time thinking about those other aspects is, super important.
I had a similar experience myself. So I set up my business in 2007 at a time when I was going through this exact process. So I was working for one of the big consulting firms and just had a feeling of, is this it? It's so stressful. I'm doing so much traveling. Other areas of my life feel so unbalanced. And I kept getting ill, and, it was all sort of coming together. And I started to think about what I needed, and the first thought I had was, I'm just going to completely give it up and retrain and do something else. And I'm a big fan of acupuncture. I have that a lot for my health, and I thought, I'll retrain as an acupuncturist. And then when I looked into it, it just felt really scary, because it's like 4 years of training. It's a whole other degree. It felt like too much. And so then I started thinking about it a bit more deeply, and I thought, actually, I really like my job. What I don't like is the traveling. I don't like the people management. I don't like the sort of corporate structure. So why don't I do the same job but do it for myself? And actually, that was what was needed. I didn't need the big change. And I suppose self-employment is a big change, but it felt less scary than starting again.
Yeah. No, I love that story. I think that's a really, really good example of what's possible if we've got enough space to really think about it and imagine that. I quite often have. Owning a cafe, that seems to be the one where I'm chatting to somebody and I'll say, what do you really want to do? I really want to own a cafe. And so there's always one of those moments. And my clients, I've never had a client that has gone on to own a cafe. That has never happened. Maybe it will at some point. But actually, when we've talked through what is it about owning a cafe? Well, I think it's about creating something. I think it's about working with people. I think it's about whatever it might be. And then often there's a slight variation on what they're currently doing, as you say, moving self-employed or a slightly different organization or whatever it might be. That is their equivalent, if you like. Working behind a bar, that's the other one. So one of my clients did take on a part-time job. So she took on one bar shift a week in her village pub. And that was it. That was all she needed to reignite what her love for what she was actually doing, which was working for a corporate. But one night a week, she worked behind the bar in her local pub, and that gave her that feeling part of the community, the connection that she was looking for. So yeah, there's different ways to skin the cat, isn't there? So
I love that. And actually, I was laughing when you said about cafe, because I've had so many conversations with friends over the years when they've been talking about their jobs and how sick they are of it. And almost all of them have said, I think I just want to open a cafe.
It's obviously the thing.
There'd be thousands and thousands of cafes.
Yes.
Went off and did it. And I suppose this speaks to your point about career crafting, doesn't it? That it's not about creating that wholesale change and running off and becoming self-sufficient or opening a cafe or becoming an acupuncturist. It's about what can you do in what you're doing currently to make it more fulfilling.
Yeah, exactly that. So I'd mentioned kind of cognitive crafting before, but there's other types of crafting that you can do within your current job. So task crafting, so picking a task that maybe you're not loving, but finding a different way of doing it, working out how you might use your strengths differently to do a job that at the moment feels a bit more mundane. Relationship crafting as well. So thinking about kinds of people that you get energy from, whether that's a colleague, it might be spending more time in the front line of your organization, seeing customers or service users, hearing their complaints, their feedback, whatever it might be, whatever reconnects you with what you're doing and why it matters. And these are very, very small things. You might spend just one day every 6 months on the front line hearing from customers, but that might be sufficient for you to get a bit more energy. You might put yourself forward for a project or an initiative which brings you sort of something that you haven't had previously. So yeah, there's lots of different small tweaks that you can do, as I say, without moving role.
And in a corporate environment, do you find people are able to find the autonomy and the space to be able to make these changes? Is it ever difficult for people to be able to craft their careers in that way?
The scientific research shows that people actually have a lot more autonomy than they think they do. So it can feel a bit like, oh goodness, I can't not do that task. I can't spend more time doing something that seems to be a little bit outside or a little bit, to the left or the right of my job description. But actually, the scientific research shows that managers are really generally quite open to these kinds of conversations. You might not even need to tell your manager, actually, because if it's just about doing a task differently or spending a little bit more time with other colleagues or leaning into certain aspects of your role more than others, we've got AI now, so judicious use of AI can make something that feels kind of tedious a lot easier, such that you've got more time to lean into something that you get a lot more value from. So yeah, I'd always encourage people to be kind of open-minded about what they can do and start pushing on that. Have that conversation with your manager where you say, there's this bit of my role that I'm really excited about. I'd love to spend more time there. Could we talk about how we might make that work? Sure, not every environment, not every manager is going to open their arms to that, but I think a lot more would than we might expect. And one thing I would really like to do is start having kind of, organizations having better conversations, how they can support their managers to then do that. It feels a little bit like that old adage about training. What happens if we train our people and they leave? It now feels a little bit similar. What happens if we help our people think about what's meaningful at work, and they leave, or they ask for movement or kind of different roles. But actually the benefits of this kind of conversation are so great. Meaningful work is the strongest driver of engagement. It's a really significant driver in retention. So all of those organizations that are spending a lot of money, recruiting the right people, now you want to keep them, you want to make them happy, and meaningful work is the single biggest driver of doing that. So we shouldn't be scared of having conversations about how we can make jobs just a little bit more meaningful for people. There's huge benefits.
And I think that's such an interesting point. And I think two things there. One is this idea of autonomy, and that we have more of it than we think. Because for me, that's a huge driver. So it's one of the reasons I went out and became self-employed. And it's probably also the reason why I'll probably never be able to be employed ever again, because I'm just now used to working in that way. But it's a massive driver for me, feeling in control of my life and being able to say yes and no to things. So I think that's an interesting point for listeners to think about, is that you probably do have more autonomy than you think you do. And your second point, I think, is really interesting, because when I was reading your book and I was thinking about, I could understand the conversations happening at an individual level, but I also thought, gosh, how great if in an organisation you could have some of these really honest conversations about this. But I could also imagine managers and leaders going, oh, but we can't because everyone will leave. And I think you're exactly right. This is what training used to be like 20 years ago, when people were afraid of doing it. It's something that has to happen. It needs to be part of appraisal processes and one-to-ones and all that sort of thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I think about my clients who I'm having these kind of conversations with, the vast majority stay in their organizations. They might move on or have a view to move on in 3, 4, 5 years, after a sensible amount of time doing something. But yeah, they want to stay. They can see some longevity in their organization. So it's just about helping them do that. And you've got a more engaged employee, better organizational citizen. They're more likely to go the extra mile. They're more likely to spot connections across the organization. They're more likely to be creative. So yeah, the benefits are huge, but it does take I guess a slightly enlightened organization or team leader to start that conversation. But I know they're out there. We just need to kind of, give them more sort of muscle power.
Well, I think it's a bit like some of the conversations I have with organisations about having these courageous conversations at all levels, and encouraging leaders to be vulnerable and to share their experiences and all that sort of thing. It's a similar sort of thing where we want to start opening things up. We don't want to be in the business of keeping people in an organisation for 20 or 30 years doing a job that they hate, because that doesn't benefit anybody. So it is that similar courageousness is needed to start having some of these conversations openly, rather than somebody having to do this on their own, because that obviously in some cases that's appropriate, but we should be, as leaders in organisations, trying to encourage people to find meaning in the work that they do with our organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
It can only be of benefit, I think. Yeah. So you've got a really nice framework in your book for people to work through, lots of practical exercises as well, which I really, really liked. If someone was starting from scratch, so had that feeling of stuckness and wanted to do something different, is there one small thing that they could do? You've talked about looking at what's meaningful for you, but is there something else that they could do to start creating change?
Yeah, so the exercise I mentioned, I think would be a really good place to start. There could be a variation on that, which is looking at your career to date and actually sort of plotting back over time. When were those peaks of meaningfulness? When were the troughs? What was happening in each of those sort of time zones? What were the kind of characteristics? Maybe using those categories of contribution, connection, autonomy, etc. That could be another way of accessing, okay, what really matters to me, and how much is my current work serving it? that would be a kind of a really good place to start. There might just be something as well. The very first step in my approach is about sort of heeding the wake up call, if you like, because I think it is very easy for us to bury our heads in the sand. You have this sort of grumbling, oh goodness, another week, a Sunday night kind of feeling, or, a conversation with a friend and you think, oh goodness, they seem much more energized by their work than I am. But these can feel quite fleeting moments. We're then pulled back into, whatever it is, a work priority or a domestic thing that's happening. So even just, I guess, feeling that sense of, oh goodness, is this it? And making that commitment to yourself to actually explore it, to not let it be buried under the sand, but spend a little bit of time thinking about it, journaling on it. Mm-hmm. If you like writing, get out the old notebook and pen. It's a really, really good way of helping make sense of things, whether that's, reading the book, speaking to somebody. Just, I guess, make that commitment to yourself that you won't let it pass without giving it some consideration. You may do nothing else, but at least you've been a bit intentional, I guess, about hearing it and deciding whether it's something that you want to act on, even if only in a small way.
I think that's really helpful. I think, and that idea of small tweaks and small changes, I think, makes it feel achievable to people. So we're not, you're not suggesting, go off and run a cafe. It's actually, let's do some really small tweaks. I think one of the other things I liked was this idea of experimenting, and you mentioned it earlier, the idea of trying things. So a bit like your client who got a job in a bar one night a week. But the other thing I liked in the book, and hopefully you can talk a bit more about it, is going out and having conversations with people who are doing something that feels similar to what you might be interested in, and just talking to them about their work. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'm always a little bit surprised where people think, the first step is to dust off their CV. And I'm like, whoa, no. There's so much you can do before that that's actually much, much more valuable than looking at a LinkedIn jobs board. I mean, there's nothing worse than the LinkedIn jobs board, even when you are actively seeking a new role. But if you're just dipping your toe in the water, it's the worst place to look. But thinking a little bit about, who's in your network? Who do you know, or who do you know that might know somebody that's doing something similar? Most people really like to be called on to ask for help. If you approach somebody, say, I'd really appreciate 20-30 minutes of your time, buy you coffee or a Zoom call or something along those lines. Lots of people will feel really flattered and actively want to have that conversation. So you're pushing often an open door, and just use that conversation to get a sense of, what is it they do? How did they get into it? What do they like about it? What would they change if anything? You're not necessarily looking to find the one answer. You just really want to hear some different perspectives on something. Talking to people, I think, is the best first experiment. And I'm always encouraging clients to come up with a longer list of people. They'll say, oh yeah, I can think of somebody. And I'm like, and who else? And who else? And who else? And actually have that list of 10 or 15 people if you can, even if they're a little bit tenuous or they're on the fringes or something, because actually that perspective is gold, really. Their understanding, their wisdom. And even if it's not directly relevant to a path that you can take or want to take, it might just give you some ideas of, that's another person I could speak to, or maybe that's a way of combining something I am already doing with something new. Maybe there's an opportunity in my current organisation to get involved in a project. I have a client who was working in publishing, nothing to do with sustainability, but just had a sense that the environment was quite important to her. She has children who were coming home from school with, recycling this and energy saving that. And so for her, she kind of realised that actually the environment was something that she wanted to factor into her work in some ways. And now she's part of a sustainability related subgroup within her organization. So again, same role, but now has this small, 5% of her time responsibility on something that really matters. And that came out of a conversation, talking to somebody. So yeah, I think it's best place to start. And only once you've really dipped your toe in and work shadowing, or maybe some kind of volunteering or some kind of projects like that. Only once you've done that kind of stuff would I be encouraging people then to start thinking about, formalizing it through a job application or something a little bit more significant.
And that really resonates with my own experience. So I talked earlier about my idea of becoming an acupuncturist. And I obviously knew about acupuncture as a patient, but I didn't know much about it as a person doing it. And so I did speak to a lot of people. I went to an open day at one of the universities that teaches it, and that was what made me decide that's not the answer. That's not the silver bullet that's going to solve my problem. The problem that I have is I don't have enough control and autonomy over my life. So and doing that wouldn't give me that either, at least for 4 years, because I would then be studying, and I'd have to travel to go study. At the time when I was looking at it, there was a college about 5 minutes from my house, but in the time when I was sort of pondering, it shut, and so the only place I could study was in Reading, so I'd have to be away from home, which didn't solve my problem. So but it was so useful to have those conversations, and then I could think, oh no, that's not going to do it, that's not the answer, and could think then more deeply about what it was, and the answer was and is running my own business. And because I'd grown up in a family where my parents had their own business, I could speak to them about what that was like.
Yeah,
I wasn't scared of it because I'd grown up seeing it work. So it's absolutely right. It sometimes feels a bit nerve-wracking kind of going to someone and saying, can you help me? But it's so worth doing.
And sometimes just how you frame that initial conversation can be helpful. So it's less about, I want to be an acupuncturist, and more about, tell me how you got into acupuncturing, if that's a word. Because actually then, you don't have to be as vulnerable as sort of sharing what feels like kind of a bold potential change. But actually it will give you probably richer information because you'll get a sense of it from their perspective. So, yeah.
I would think conversation is the answer to most things.
Yes,
let's just start talking to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the stories, isn't it? When you talk about yourself, you're often telling a story. And so, again, that feels like a much more natural way to receive information. It makes it easier to spot links, to spot similarities and differences, to get a flavour of, I guess, the emotional side of work and particular jobs. I wanted there to be lots of stories. You mentioned the stories throughout the book. So every chapter has kind of a case study, but then there's also one case study, Jenny, that goes all the way through, because I wanted there to be that broader, sort of deeper window, I suppose, into some of the challenges of being in this stuck phase at the beginning, but also the highs and lows of them moving through it. I really enjoyed writing it. So yeah, I feel like that ability to tell stories, whether it's through conversation or books or whatever, is often the thing that lands sort of most well with people.
Yeah, oh, definitely. The brain loves a story. So I think it's one of the things that makes this book really, really engaging is you can read it and think, oh yeah, I know, I felt that, or my colleague or my partner has felt that, and you can immediately connect with it. You mentioned earlier about, and coming back to the story thing, the story that we tell ourselves about our fear, and how people can do some work on that to recraft it, to sort of reframe it. What does that look like in practice? Have you got any examples of people who've done that?
Yeah, so we tell ourselves lots of stories about work. There's a story which is, progression and means upwards promotion, have to be moving up a level every few years. And if I'm not, then something's gone wrong. I'm not meeting my potential. We've talked already about I can't do this because of mortgage, or I can't do this because the kids are still in school, or whatever it might be. There's a story often about, I've done this for 20 years. I've invested so much in it. I couldn't step away or do something different. There's probably also a story around identity. I am a X. I couldn't possibly ever not be an X. So often through my coaching, it's really about trying to identify that story. These are often quite buried deep. We've never really said them out loud. It's just something we feel is true, and we sort of hold as being true. So identifying it is usually the sensible first step. And then after just testing that, really. So, working out which bits of it are indeed true, which of it bits of it perhaps are not quite true, or not true all of the time, or not going to be true forever. And then thinking about, okay, what might a more helpful a story that might serve us a little bit better for what we want to do, how we want to go forward. So sometimes this is very implicit, sometimes it's much more explicit. I'll adapt my style depending on who I'm talking to and sort of the language that they're using, but I will encourage them to come back to that more helpful story and use that as a bit of a center point, a grounding point for our work together. So, it might be, if we think about the can't leave because of the mortgage or whatever it might be, helping people see that actually what they're holding as being security, maybe there's other ways of having security. Maybe one relationship with an employer feels very secure, but actually there could be more security from having a broader pool, not having all of your eggs in one basket, building your skills such that when the job market changes, or AI technology changes, you're ready and adaptable to that, and not necessarily sort of holding fast to what you have been doing in the way that you have been doing it. None of us know that jobs are forever, but I think we can often feel sort of a slightly misplaced overconfidence in that, and then redundancy comes and it all feels like it's crashing down. So helping people see that actually there's different ways of having that stability. So I guess helping people sort of gently rewrite their story, just enough to help them then go out and explore and do some stuff, because actually those conversations, those experiments then become sort of and they emphasize that positive story a little bit better, and that can then help build that sense of momentum.
And I think that point you make about the career ladder is really interesting, because when I left my consultancy job, somebody said to me, but you're stepping off this career ladder that you've spent so many years building. And in that moment, when they said that to me, I'd realized I don't care. I don't want to be on that ladder anymore. So I'm not bothered. I want to be on a different ladder.
Yeah, absolutely. I started my career in the civil service, so it's very hierarchical. You know what grade you are, you know what grade everyone else is, you know what you have to do to go up. There's a sense of, oh, you've been doing this for 2 years. There's a forward, upward momentum, and quite often I still work a lot with civil servants and senior civil servants, which is great. I really love it, but I'm often working with them at the first time when they've actually thought, oh, do I want promotion? Like, that's a choice. Actually, that's a choice that I have available to make. And there's pros and cons. And so actually helping them work through some of those pros and cons and decide, yeah, it is for me, or, you know what, isn't for me. This is okay. I can do different things. I can get progression and stretch in different ways. I can stay at this level. I can go down a level, like actually there's all of that is open to us. But often it's this mid-career phase where you actually think about it for the first time, which seems crazy on one level, but I've been there. I know exactly how that happens.
And I think it's so entrenched culturally, isn't it? In the way, success, as you said earlier, success is measured by upwards and more money and a bigger desk or a bigger office or a bigger car or whatever. And that's how we perceive success to be. And therefore, it's how we perceive success in ourselves. And I think it's really quite nice when you are able to step off of that and think, well, actually, I'm going to look at success in my life in a different way. And it doesn't mean that. It could mean something totally different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's for us to choose. And that choice is both really empowering, but also quite a lot of responsibility. Like, oh, God, I've got to choose what actually matters to me. What do I want to do? There's no right or wrongs, but it can feel a little bit overwhelming to realise it's your choice.
Yes. I think then you get into this kind of decision fatigue, don't you, where it's almost, it feels too much choice, and then you need help narrowing it down, because not everything is for you, because it wouldn't give you that meaning, or you wouldn't enjoy it or whatever. So it's you need help sometimes with that process, which is where you come in. And I think it's interesting that you say that sort of the negative side of it. And in your book, one of the last chapters is about the dark side of all of this. And I think it's really refreshing in a book like this to have that acknowledgement that this is not the silver bullet for solving, the world's problems, and there is a dark side to this type of work. So I thought it was great you had that. Could you talk a bit more about what you see are some of the dark sides of this?
Yeah, so that was the focus of my master's research. So that's where I went really deep in my sort of postgrad study. Again, very much driven by my own experience. I'd always known that doing work that felt meaningful to me was super important. And I also knew that I experienced significant work-related stress. So, fairly sustained over 10, 15 years, periods of ill health at times, to the point of burnout. And I just felt like there was some relationship between those two things. These are connected. And so my research was very much into the relationship between meaningful work and stress in particular. And, perhaps no surprises, the more we care about something, the less easy we're able to hold boundaries or maintain perspective. And so when challenges and setbacks happen, as they do in all organizations, all sorts of roles, we can really take that to heart, and it can really help us. It can kind of really sort of cause us to experience some of these dark sides that can affect our physical health. It can affect relationships. So I knew that within the book, I didn't want to write a sort of toxic positivity, everything's going to be brilliant, do this one small thing and everything will be great, because clearly life is just not like that. It's about navigating that line between the two so that you can get the significant benefits, but also just be alive to, cautious of potential dark sides. The best thing, frankly, to do to guard against those dark sides is to make sure that your meaningful work is part of a broader meaningful life. Because actually, if your life feels full of meaning, you are better able to keep the perspective. Because you might be throwing yourself into a work project and really deeply invested in it, but you've also got a great group of friends who are supportive. You've got hobbies that you enjoy. You're spending time with family members that light you up. You see yourself as, a sum of many different parts, all of which are important and fulfilling. And so when work feels tricky, you're able to keep it in that sort of position rather than it spilling out and affecting different areas. And when I think back to my experience, because I was so deeply wedded into my work and my identity as whatever it was at the time, program director or whatever it might be, I'd lost sight, I suppose, of those other things that really mattered in life. So it's absolutely possible to navigate it, but you need to do that consciously. So it felt important to me that I did bring that in the book to make sure it was balanced.
Yeah. And I think that's right, because I guess there is that risk that if you're putting all of the meaning for your entire life into work, then you're potentially investing too much of your time in that. But also, if that does go wrong, as you say, in terms of redundancy or something like that, then that's it. All meaning from your life has gone, and it needs to be part of the whole, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely that. And there's other ways that we can guard against it, sort of on a smaller scale, just kind of careful monitoring, a bit of a reflective practice to notice how you're feeling, whether you're sort of getting too invested in something, whether you need to kind of address the balance a little bit. There's some smaller, more tactical things that you can do in parallel. But meaningful work as part of a meaningful life is the sweet spot.
Fantastic. Well, that feels like a great place to stop our conversation, because that's the aim, isn't it? That's where we all want to get to. If someone listening to this is interested in finding out more about you and your work, where's the best place for them to take a look?
Yeah, thank you, Susanne. So I've got a website, which is www.jess-annison.com. So there, but also on LinkedIn. I'm sort of love to connect on LinkedIn, so do drop me a connection request. And very, very keen to be connected there as well.
Well, thank you so much. I've loved our conversation. I love your book. I've recommended it to so many people because I keep having these conversations with people who are my sort of age, and clearly this is a common problem. So I'd encourage listeners to go out and buy it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
No, thank you, Susanne. I really appreciated it.
you so much for listening to this episode of the Change Stories podcast. I love this conversation and I hope you did too. Thanks as ever to my wonderful guests and to Pete Morgan at Monkey Pants Productions for making the podcast sound amazing. If you want to find out more about this or any other episodes of Change Stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk where you will find all the episodes and show notes. If you have enjoyed listening, please rate and review the Change Stories podcast on your podcast listening platform. And do please let me know if you have ideas or requests for future episodes. You can contact me and find out more about change and storytelling on my website, www.feldsparconsulting.com. Thanks again for joining in with the Change Stories conversation.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.